welcome. Welcome. We're excited to have you all here. Thank you so much for joining us. We are thrilled to have you join us at this session with our Ashoka team. We wanted to do this session specifically to get people understanding what these networks and platforms can do for us as social ventures. The work that Aspire and the Ashoka team has done is absolutely amazing. I think you'll all be really thrilled to learn about this really impactful work that they've been working very intently with a group of social entrepreneurs. We talked about the session achieving impact at exponential scale by thinking and acting like a platform, because the platform is really what has made Ashoka and this work with Aspire really connect people together. And it's really hard in today's world to connect with people, not just, we're all virtual and now we're coming back into in person, but how this technology can really advance our work. So the accelerator and learning lab that they do with the Aspire is so much that we can learn from. And we thank you all for joining us. First off, a couple of housekeeping things. We would love for you to share in the chat your name, your organization that you're calling in from, and what part of the world. We'd love to get to know everyone ahead of time. If you have a LinkedIn link, that's great as well. Then our typical housekeeping things, if we do want this to be interactive, so please unmute yourself. If you have a question, you can raise your hand along the way. We would love to make this as interactive as possible, so don't worry, you can definitely interact with everyone as we go. And we're going to go ahead and kick off. I see that people are starting to put in the chat, so definitely put in your name, your organization, and where you're calling in from. We'd love to know where everyone's coming in from. So I will pass it on to the Aspire team that we've been working with. Irina has been working with Ashoka and the Aspire for a while now. I'm going to allow them to do their introduction. So Irina, Lobo, and Maria Zapata, thank you so much for joining us, and we're excited to hear more from you.
Thank you so much, Debbie, and a warm welcome to everybody to today's session. Thanks to the Catalyst 2030 team for inviting us. This is the first time we are actually doing this, so bear with us. We are a little nervous, but it's a great pleasure to just start sharing what we are learning and what we have been learning for the last 3 years. So just a little bit about myself. My name is Maria Zapata. I'm Spanish, normally based out of Madrid, but I've been spending a few months here in India. I've been with Ashoka, you won't believe it, but for almost 20 years. I launched the Ashoka Spanish operation in 2003. I helped the Western European operations to get up and running. And about 12 years ago, I co-founded this program called The Globalizer. So I've been doing a lot since then about scaling social impact, what social entrepreneurs need to do, et cetera, et cetera. So when the opportunity came about to actually get engaged and launch with our knowledge partner, Societal Thinking, this program of Aspire to really help social entrepreneurs think and design what could they do to reach exponential scale, it was an opportunity that I jumped at without really thinking about it. It was an opportunity not to be missed for me. So let me share you briefly about the agenda for today so you know what's coming. We will be sharing a few insights or a few highlights about Ashoka and Aspire. Then we will actually deep dive into some principles that we believe help social entrepreneurs think and strategize like a platform to design for exponential scale. And then I'll come back with you to just summarize and share with you some reflections and learnings that we've had over the last 3 years. And then we'll open the floor for Q&A. But as Debbie said, if you have any questions along the way, you can put it in the chat, and maybe Debbie can, I won't be reading the chat, but Debbie, you can just interrupt us in any point. So I think next slide, are you seeing the slides? Is it okay? Yes, you have start sharing. That's great. Thanks, Ira. So I think most of you will know what Ashoka is about, but just in case some of you don't, let me just share a few highlights about what we do. So Ashoka was created 43 years ago, 1980, with the idea that there is nothing more powerful to change the world than an innovative idea in the hands of a social entrepreneur. This is the two things that Ashoka strongly believes are very important to create social change. We work with we have selected some of the most impressive innovators around the world. We have about 4,000 in our Ira. Yeah, exactly. I think you might, Ira, you might want to show it as a screen, the full screen. I don't know if that's what people are seeing, but I'm seeing the small slides on the left. But anyway, 4,000 social entrepreneurs, 90 countries. We always use the same selection criteria for building a peer or a network of peers. We actually call it more like a family, where we help our fellows, especially through those initial years, while they are starting to think about how they are going to scale their impact. That's really when we actually select them. They've had about 2 or 3 years proving their theory of change, making sure that it works. And then we come in and we call it more as, I would say, growth. We give them a living stipend, and more important, a community of peers that they work with and they learn from. Next slide. Our vision, Ira, is Ira, can you go to the next slide?
I did. I don't know. Can you also?
No, so the next one. We are still, you are still showing the Ashoka.
I don't know. What are people saying? Can you see everyone a change maker slide? Or?
No.
Sorry.
Do you want me to? Yeah, there you go. But it's coming up. I think it's coming up like not as a full screen, but we are actually getting all those squares. I don't know what you're seeing, but that's what we are seeing.
What do you see, Debbie? I'm sorry for the interruption. Is it?
Why don't, Ilian, do you want to pull up the slides? We kind of dropped them into our slide deck. We're not sure what it's like a PDF something going on here. But let me see if Ilian can pull up hers, and then it'll be full screen there.
There you
Great.
go.
Thank you.
I think that works better.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so our vision, and it really comes from working with all these social entrepreneurs. We understood from them, with all the Ashoka fellows, that really what they are doing is they're activating their communities to be part of the solution, right? So that's really where that's how we actually came about for this vision, that we need in everyone a change maker world, a world where everyone feels empowered and with the necessary skills and necessary experience to really take action, and create positive change. So that's really what we have been working on. We also know that in order to have this systemic change at a scale is something that you cannot do alone. You need to set up change-making networks. You need to actually drive the ecosystem for a collective effort, So both collaboration and synergy is extremely important for us, even though sometimes people misunderstand that we are really pushing for these solo players, the social entrepreneurs, but they are actually the ones that create this ecosystem, this agency in their communities, etc. One of the things that I realized working with fellows many years ago is that there is one thing that keeps them awake at night, and is how to reach many more people with their innovations and their impact. If there is one thing, I think that's mainly it across the board. So that's why, as I said, that's why we created the Globalizer, because we were also seeing that a lot of the insights and best practices were actually coming from the business sector that has very different incentive structure, very different dynamics. So a lot of our Ashoka fellows were actually putting in place strategies that made no sense for our sector. And that's when we realized that we needed to create a program to actually distill learnings that were useful for the citizen sector. So through the Globalizer, we support probably some like 400 fellows from around the world to really design their system change strategies to get to large social impact. And I'm happy to share that it actually seems to be working well. We have done our impact assessment. 100% of them say that the program has actually impacted their vision. About 92%, they say it has improved their strategies. And one measure that we take very close to our hearts, 97% say that after being in the program, their strategies are actually more open. So is this about indirect impact and opening up, which is what we are after. Next slide. Yeah, thanks. So ASPIRE, as I said, no, following Globalizer for about 10 years. And when I realized that partnering with our knowledge partner societal thinking, that has actually been a huge help for all of us to really understand more about exponential scale and more about the use of technology, etc. We really wanted to say, okay, how can we actually help the fellows go a little further, maybe think about exponential scale? And that's why we created ASPIRE, no? To really ponder about this question, how to create exponential scale. So we studied Ashoka fellows who have platforms at the core of what they do. We also studied networks that have actually, put it into motion for exponential scale. We learned a lot about societal thinking and platform thinking, thanks to our partners. And slowly we developed this program that is a combination of an accelerator and a learning hub. So it's a program that is conceived to help us learn, reflect, iterate, ponder about questions, and really supporting social entrepreneurs to think strategically how to bring their impact to scale, leveraging platform thinking, change-making networks, and benefiting from an underlying technology infrastructure, right? So those are the kind of three pillars or three underlying topics that ASPIRE now embeds, no? Platform thinking plus change-making networks and the use and the leverage of technology to get that. But we have also seen in multiple examples that technology is an important tool to design at a scale, but it's only a tool. And it's only a tool that a social entrepreneur really needs to leverage well. But after accompanying many fellows for many years, what we realize is that what it really matters is changing the way they think. So pivoting the way they think from this idea of problem solver to an enabler. No, so and we'll be talking more about that through the next slides. But it's really this idea of empowering others, engaging a network, orchestrating the people in that network, activating the agency of local change makers. And of course, technology will help you orchestrate that. But the first thing is changing that mindset, no? So I'm going to introduce you to my dear colleague, Irina Snissar. She's the knowledge director of ASPIRE, and she'll be sharing with you a bit more this set of principles that we believe are useful for any social entrepreneur, whether they use technology or not, but really to think how to activate exponential change. So, Ira, over to you.
Thank you, Maria. Hi, everyone. Pleasure to meet you. Just a couple of lines about myself. I am originally from Kazakhstan. I'm ethnically Russian, and I've been living and working in India for the last 15 years with the social entrepreneurship ecosystem. Many of those years been spent with Ashoka. I used to lead the search and selection of the Ashoka Fellows, that process Maria has described in detail before. I also worked independently with many social entrepreneurs in India and helping them build their organizations, initiatives, hire leadership teams, and so on. And I also joined ASPIRE, inspired by this idea of what platform thinking can do for social entrepreneurs, and have been on this quest now for 3 years, together with our fellows and Maria. So we can start showing the slides, Ellen, again, from that last one, which it was. So when we started to say, we know what platforms are in the business world. We all know the Uber or the food delivery or the Amazons, right? And we all, I think, are amazed at the scale and the potential of these models to scale and to engage millions of people simultaneously, right? And that has really captured the imagination of the business world, and everyone is after the so-called network effects and so on to be able to actually create this kind of value for their businesses. However, when we really endeavored in this journey, we realized that platforms for social impact really do something fundamentally different, right? Because if you look about any of the business platforms, they work like an hourglass. So there is interactions and all the people trying to sell things on Amazon and people trying to buy things on Amazon. And Amazon basically is in the middle, capturing that value as a private company, right? And then being able to leverage that value for mainly for themselves. They do share it back to the network because they make their marketplace better, but it's still highly focused on basically Amazon or any of the for-profit platforms, basically harnessing the value for themselves, right? While the non-profit platforms or platforms created for social impact actually function as kind of like a Wi-Fi, no? A system that distributes value into the ecosystem. So, and this is a analogy created actually by our partner Societal Thinking. And when we started to say, what does that really mean? What does it look? How does one think and act enable to actually to be able to bring something like that to life? We said, let us go into the Ashoka Fellowship and really learn from some of the leading social entrepreneurs around the world, how they went about it. And so we shortlisted about 30 models of fellows who around the world who qualify as platforms. And then we shortlisted about 14 of them who were the most successful, had the most amount of impact. And we really went into depths of studying how these social entrepreneurs went about designing their interventions and what guided their choices, their decision-making, and so on. And that's how we also had in-depth conversations with the entrepreneurs. And this is how this set of 9 design principles has emerged, which basically we have seen these principles manifest in the work of almost any organization that has actually used platform approach to impact at scale. But what was most fascinating for us when we actually started to explore this further is that these principles were universally useful to any organization, not necessarily only the ones who were actually going to try to build a digital platform. And that's where it became really fascinating and exciting for us, because even within Ashoka Fellowship, only 4% of Ashoka Fellows actually use technology at the core of their theory of change. So there will always be only a very small percentage of social entrepreneurs who are actually so tech savvy that they can build a massive technology platform. So we have an Ashoka Fellow who started, say, Allison.com, one of the largest online learning platforms that has 20 million students and graduates. It works worldwide, but you can count some of those on your fingers, right? Donors Choose in the United States, that is now in every third, public school. And it's really wonderful when this happens, but we realize that for most nonprofit founders who did not come from tech backgrounds, that wasn't a pathway that was viable to say, I'm going to become the new Amazon of human rights or whatever, right? So, and sometimes that just wasn't what was needed, particularly also because unlike the commercial platforms, system-changing platforms, which I'm talking more about a model of approaching a particular aspect of change, they actually have to engage people on the ground. So it cannot be just this online transaction. I get an Uber to go from here to there and I pay, through my credit card, because system change requires many layers of people in society to shift their behavior in a particular way. And that requires human networks to come together around a particular vision. No? So you see here the idea of aligning towards better outcomes. So it's not about aligning on a digital plan, but actually society aligning, at various levels towards a particular outcome, as well as cultivating change online, which is you need people on the ground, change makers, people within communities or leaders of citizen sector organizations who actually drive particular change. So I want to take you through a couple of examples because this may be sounding very abstract right now. So next, Ellen, please. So I'll talk to you about a couple of examples and hopefully it will become a bit more clear. So if you see an Ashoka Fellow, Dr. Sanjeev Arora, founder of an organization called Project ECHO. Project ECHO started as Sanjeev Arora's initial insight that he knew something. He is a doctor, and he knew something. He knew how to treat a particular disease better than any doctor in his area. He used to practice in the US. He still does practice. And so patients used to wait for months and months and months to actually get seen by him in the United States, because he was, he was such a sought after expert. But then he realized that in all of these months of people waiting for him to see them, people were dying or their disease was getting worse. And so he said, this couldn't be the case, right? And so then he said, how do I distribute this ability to solve among many? And he actually started, he identified doctors who he started to have these kind of training clinics online to teach them how to spot the signs of the disease, how to diagnose it, then how to treat it. And after a couple of years of that, they actually did very rigorous, he works out of a university, so he has a lot of the research kind of muscle supporting him. And they did studies that actually said that treatments, delivered by the other doctors were just as effective as Dr. Sanjeev Arora's. And so that moment on, he actually knew he was onto something there. It was a certain, way of teaching and learning, which was very case-based. So there is a particular culture of learning that's really important in this intervention, which is not that he's lecturing those doctors, but they bring cases and they discuss. And there's some kind of a rule that a lecturer, so to speak, doesn't speak more than 20% of the time, and the rest of it is actually people bringing their cases and discussing. But he realized that actually you can spread knowledge about anything around the world with this methodology and make everyone better off. And so they did it as a project, and they did it for a number of diseases. They did it for a number of different areas. And then they realized you can actually treat any problem as a disease, a systemic problem. A bad governance is a kind of a disease, right? And you can actually create learning communities that function together to be able to address it. So what Project ECHO ended up doing is creating an open public good, which is their methodology and the system of engaging, and the platform on which people can. They used Zoom for the longest time. They have some kind of a unlimited Zoom license from Zoom. So they have millions of people joining those Zoom calls for free, but is not really a big deal in technology. Technology is, it's the same platform we're using now, basically, but the insights there were about how do you unlock agency of so many different people who are right there on the ground in that, village in Kenya or in Kolhapur in India or in rural America, wherever it is, right? How do you unlock the agency of that doctor there with whatever that is that you know? And how do you then build open public goods, which is in their case, their methodology and their platform, so that people can actually join? Next, Ellen. Let me take you to another example of an Ashoka Fellow, Roseanne Haggerty, and she was working on a very different issue. She was working on an issue of homelessness in the United States. And for the longest time, she was basically building housing. She did some really pathbreaking work. They took over a huge hotel in New York and converted it into, a place for the homeless, which was much celebrated. And after all of that, Roseanne and her team reflected and said, we've done all this great work, and there are still same number of homeless people as they were 10 years ago everywhere on the streets. So there is something we are not doing right. There's something we are not plugging at the source of this problem, that we are not really solving the problem. And so their team went through this 1 year long reflection process of actually saying, what do we need to do to really make sure there are no homeless people on the streets of the United States? And they've come up with this completely new model of working. And again, it's focused a lot on saying, how do you empower local communities to be able to be responsible for eliminating homelessness from their context? And it's highly local, right? So it's people in that municipality, people who live in that area who know who is the person who's already homeless or who is about to become homeless because of debt or because of whatever issues, and who you need to transition out of homelessness, into, new housing or whatever that is, right? So they realized that you needed highly contextualized actors, change makers in the municipality, with the citizen sector participating, to be focused on this issue. And they created something called zero functional homelessness. So it's a very, if you see, it's like a very simple idea, right? It's like zero homeless people on the streets. And then you actually able to rally a community, local community around this idea. And what they do is then they provide that local community with certain tools that they may need to be able to do it well. So, how do you track who is getting on the street, who is on the street, and who can be gotten out of the street, right? It's like a dashboard that's quite simple. How do you give people materials and so on? So they really work as an enabler. And if you see in this little chart here, they have now 84 communities around the United States that are committed to making this happen. And they also have 14 communities that have actually already achieved that goal. So of zero functional homelessness on their streets. So what is really fascinating about this example is that technology virtually played almost no role in what community solutions have done or is doing. But what are they really doing is empowering the ecosystem with knowledge and data, right? They are able to narrow down on what is it exactly the local municipality needs to know, and local actors, to be able to actually effectively eliminate homelessness. And they're also very focused on cultivating change offline, which is who are the strategic actors in this community, in this particular municipality or city, who really care about this issue, and how do you bring them all to the table, and then how do you help them all learn together and feel like they own this goal together. And that has really become the role of Roseanne Haggerty, or community solutions. And another very interesting example is that we have seen that very often when we speak to Ashoka fellows or other social entrepreneurs about this, there is that fear of saying, but if I share completely openly what I do, then how do I not lose on my advantage? How do I not lose my funding, right? Which is, we all live in this world, unfortunately, where the competition for funding is the reality. And so one of the things that we have seen, that both of these organizations, Project Echo and Community Solutions, have actually been able to become magnets for funding, a huge scale of funding, which they are not absorbing for themselves, but they're actually able to pass it on to the networks that they have activated. So small organizations can say, we are implementing Project Echo to drive vaccinations in India, or we are using community solutions in our municipality in North Orleans to eliminate homelessness, and they get funding which is driving on the brand of this organization. So it's kind of a switch of the mindset, from scarcity to abundance in some way. I'm sorry, I'll stop here. Debbie, I can see you raise your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Martin to ask his question. He's calling in from Turks and Caicos Islands, if anyone wants to be jealous like I am. Martin, can you unmute and ask your question?
Yes. Hi, good morning, everybody.
Hello.
I am new to Catalyst, and I've been keeping up with Catalyst, but I want to know, as far as I am concerned, I'm aligning myself with some of Catalyst policies. I just want to know how it may suit, or how I may fit in being in Turks and Caicos Islands.
What I'm going to ask, if you don't mind, Martin, since we're specifically talking about Aspire and their project, we can talk to you offline. I'll put some suggestions in the chat because we want to. I thought your question was specifically to Irina. At this point, if anyone else has a question so far about understanding, kind of getting this idea of how they're using these platforms to connect people together, to share information, to network better. Mary, you got a question? And right when she does it, she pauses. Mary,
yeah. So,
go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead,
Yeah.
Mary.
Okay. So I wanted to ask if you have some effective or good practices to do this kind of mindset that you were talking from scarcity to abundance. Because in engagement, I see that many times people do want to collaborate, people do want to share the ideas, but there's always this fear of losing ownership over things. So I'm wondering if you have any suggestions to help people have this mindset or strengthen some part of the collaborative leadership or their identities.
Thank you, Mary. I think there are multi-layered answers to this question, and it depends on sort of where you start from. Sometimes it's really a personal thing, right? It's kind of a deep how people think, how their whole psyche sometimes structured, right? So and there are some programs that really focus on that, right? And so the Aspire's answer is a little different to that, which is to say that we actually think that there is a kind of an entity, is an organization, right? It's not just one entrepreneur, but it's an organization. So we work with a team usually of the entrepreneur and a couple of their team members. And what we believe is that if an organization begins to consciously apply these design principles and practice them in the smallest of decisions that they make, that's what results in a completely new behavior. So it's like, as opposed to this being a huge pivot where, you suddenly say, oh, now we're going to open up and give everything for free for everybody. And, everyone just terrified that they're not going to get their salaries tomorrow is more of saying, where do you see value? So we actually have a exercise which we will share, which we help your organization reflect on the design principles. So how do you activate agency? How do you distribute ability to solve? And think about what would happen if you did, right? And when the team sees value in that and saying, next time when we have a program or we have some new initiatives that we're designing, how can we incorporate this thinking, this idea in what we do? If we are collecting certain data and insights, how do we think about empowering others with this data and insights? Maybe empowering people from whom we are collecting the data. How could this farmer who I work with make better decisions because now he or she knows that there's a price for something, right? Or other organizations that may be coming to the same area next month collecting the same data, for example, right? So we believe that by going incrementally and practicing certain behaviors, it's like a habit, right? You actually develop a whole new persona of the organization, a whole new culture that doesn't have to be a radical shift, but more of an incremental change that's consistent.
Yeah, I think also to Mary, to complement what just Ira mentioned, I've also seen it over the years that it's almost like a state of the curve in the entrepreneur's life. First, they are trying to make a point and prove their hypothesis, and that's what they launch their own organization. Then they grow their organization and they reach at some point where they say, scaling my organization is not going to provide the kind of impact that I really want. And I think that is also when many Ashoka fellows start being more of an ecosystem player. And it's also, I think it requires, as Ira is a way of thinking, but also this sense of, okay, I am able to open up because my organization is stable. And then by the virtue of opening up and bringing others, your organization actually gets much more funding. So it's almost like a counterintuitive, because the system is really produced, or is really set up as what exactly are you doing? The funders want direct impact. So it becomes really nerve-wracking and saying, oh, I'm just going to do indirect impact, I'm going to open up, because that's not how the funders and the systems operate, right? So you do need to have some kind of cushion. And I think that's when it really works. You're not going to lose your work, the work of so it's almost like an evolution of a social entrepreneur's life. That's also like doing it too early is probably, we try to tell people, but I've seen over and over that it's a moment in your structure and your experience and your evolution, right?
But it's not a certainty, right? So you can have an organization that is very mature, but that decides to never open up and continues to build its own, fortress in some way, right? So the mindset shift, it's still very much necessary at whatever stage of the organization or entrepreneur it is. Robert, I think Robert was first, and then Deepa.
And unmute.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Irina. It's very most interesting. I just had a couple of questions, and one is the tension between working to your local stakeholders, and then once you build a platform, you've got external stakeholders, and you begin to try and feed your external stakeholders to show them what you're achieving. And then this tension, and I think maybe Maria alluded to earlier, but this is the thing I'm trying to balance at the moment, being authentic to the local stakeholders and prioritizing their needs, but also at the same time trying to make a compelling case to people who are outside my local community.
Right. So if you see, Robert, what we have seen actually, this example of this multi-layered network is what can actually produce the most powerful results. So like we have a fellow called Gary Cohen in the United States, and he created an organization called Health Without Harm. And basically his vision was, how do you eliminate harmful chemicals from circulation in healthcare system? And for him, the local community was basically the medical system in the United States. So the doctors, the nurses, and it starts small, a few hospitals, and you kind of educate. But then the name of the organization is Health Without Harm. Gary Cohen is the founder of the organization. So, he needed to work with very specific stakeholders on the ground, but then he also needed to look at the systemic level of saying, his first target was mercury. How do you eliminate mercury out of hospitals? And then he had to say, how do we actually get to the procurement of these hospitals, right? They shouldn't buy the thermometers that have mercury. And then you had to go to the hospital boards, so it had to go kind of escalate from very local change makers, where a local nurse would say, let's not use this, let's buy an electrical thermometer, to very high level of, boards of hospitals and so on. And then it became also about legislation. And that's kind of that multi-layered network. And he also did this then in Europe and Asia, following a very similar blueprint. And then actually when mercury was out, he started to say, the network started to say, hey, we are really powerful, we can do something else. So then they started to say, how do we remove single-use plastics or cancerogenic materials from, any packaging that contains medicines and so on and so forth. So I don't know if that answers, maybe to some extent. There are some other examples that I can maybe think of. I don't know, Maria, if you want to add anything there.
Thank you.
I think what's nice about that, Irina, is that what you're talking about, this distribute, the ability to solve, is once they solve this one problem collectively, they're distributing the way that they did it into multiple countries so it can scale. And it's not the social entrepreneur saying, I'm going to go into all these other countries and do all this work. I'm going to have the local partners do that and support them in their work. Deepa and then Solomon, and then we have a good exercise, and then we'll come back for more Q&A.
Yeah, thanks for that. I was just going to actually just expand on what Debbie was saying about the intentionality of scale, because Dr. Aurora had it when Project Echo was started, that intentionality of wanting to achieve scale and impact was there from the outset. So I was quite interested in, Maria, your analysis of maturity of the organization, because ultimately we want to be in a position where we can encourage this platform type of thinking and this distributed system, and the principles that you've outlined are really helpful for that. But how do we design for that? And particularly from a collaborative perspective, and thinking about the essence of the work that Catalyst does and wanting to bring about collective collaborative action, actually, how do we start with that intentionality and bypass the ego and the limitations and the I'm here to solve my problem, I'm operating in a competitive mindset, to actually together and with this distributed system we can achieve much more, much faster. Yeah. Because the time is of the essence. And so I kind of thinking about that intentionality from outset and what you've seen so far.
I mean, I think one of the learnings that we've had is that in every single Ashoka Fellow meeting, and Salomon and some others will know this, you know, they all fall in love with each other and they all want to collaborate with each other, but then they go back home and they have the realities, right? So I think collaboration for the sake of collaboration doesn't work. I think it's really understanding what each of them bring to the table. So let me give you an example. We have Hasima in India, one of the fellows, who is working against human trafficking. And, you know, she was working on it and really hard. And after a few years, she realized that they were the same organizations, you know, doing the same kind of stuff in the same regions, in the same communities. And actually, she said, you know, some of them are actually much better than I am in rescuing. Some of them are much better in what I am in rehabilitating once they go back into their communities. So she actually created this almost like a scaffolding of what each organization were very good at. And what I think she did very well, and I think that could be you know, a hint of what you could do, is really helping each of them identify what they are best and their gains of actually working together. You know, like really understanding, okay, I'm very good in rehabilitation, so I'm just going to, and also it requires a lot of getting rid of egos, which is not easy. It requires a lot of orchestration. Like when we say become an orchestrator, is oftentimes much more difficult, right? Because you need to put yourself behind an idea. You need to make an idea as wide as possible so everyone fits in. Gary, for instance, now his big kind of vision is that we are all, remind me here, Ira, the phrases she uses, we are, anyway, it's something, it will come to us. It's something that everyone is like, of course, I want to be a savior of the planet. I think it's as wide as that. And each of us find our way to do it. So, you know, encompassing large visions, but with really targeted at the same time milestones, it also helps, you know? So scaffolding, orchestration, understanding why you're bringing these people, what they bring to the table, these multi-layer networks that Ira was referring to, it's all part of these thriving ecosystems. Is it easy? Absolutely not. Having money that supports that kind of orchestration and that people coming together is always a great incentive. But you know, it normally comes first. You do the network, then the money comes in, then you have more money. So it's a
and I want to add that in Hasina's case in particular, one of the things that really enabled her to become the orchestrator was the digital infrastructure that she developed. So she said that at the core of the process of stopping human trafficking are human cases, right? There are specific people who are trafficked. And so what you really need is a system that any organization that works on trafficking can use, so that when there is a person, rescued in Thailand and they need to be rehabilitated back in, say, Manipur in India or wherever, it's all in one system, and any organization that is in between can actually be plugged into the same system, so that there is no bureaucracy, that this can happen, quickly. And so that's the contribution that she made to the sector. So all these several hundred organizations that she orchestrates use the same system. That is not, again, it's not a sophisticated technology, but it's the insight that's important, right? What are you orchestrating for? What does each one of these organizations cares for? It's about this person reaching home, being rehabilitated, getting a livelihood, whatever those important milestones are, that actually then helps people come together, and may not always necessarily about, oh, we all agree on everything with each other, right? It's more about we can collaborate because we have a shared goal, but it doesn't mean we all are exactly the same or we see things exactly the same way, because that we have seen doesn't really work.
Yeah, so they really see the value for collaboration, right? It's not because we are all so cool and we love each other, but it's the fact that we are actually collaborating is making my job easier as an organization, is bringing me more funding. I mean, that also happened with Jürgen Griesbeck and Street Football World, right? They are a coalition of 80 local, or now it's probably more than that, but 80 to 100 local organizations who the only thing they have in common is that they use football as a way for social change, right? That's the only one thing. But they all come together and they realize that by working together, they can actually access bigger funding than if they were all doing it alone. So I think this idea of collaboration, not for the sake of collaboration, but collaboration because by collaborating, my vision and my goal is actually getting more easily. I think that's important. So why?
And there's also whoever is bringing this network together, right? And there are different schools of thought. There's also great ways of thinking about collaborative impact, but at least from the ASPIRE learnings, what we talk about is, what do you as a convener of that network or the ecosystem, what do you bring as a shared value, right? Is it the infrastructure that people use? Is it the data? Is it the technology? What is it that actually pulls people together and it kind of inadvertently almost aligns people around a particular goal? So it's like, to give you another example this is a slightly more digital heavy idea, but we have a fellow in India who basically says that, with all the aging population around the world, and people need old age savings, right? And that people who are daily wage laborers and so on should be saving for their old age because social systems won't be able to support them. And so he created a digital platform that basically allows this customer-facing interface. It also very much deeply ingrained in understanding what does it take for a daily wage laborer who makes, whatever, $1 a day or something, to save 20 cents out of it for their old age, right? It's such a big change in behavior and all of that. And he incorporated a lot of that into how the platform is designed, how people get onboarded, how they understand the value of savings. But the way that infrastructure is designed is that any government around the world can actually pick it up and deploy it in a matter of a couple of months. So long as they agree on the goal, saying, yes, we should enable old age savings, they actually can deploy this platform, and then, the banks can start playing on the platform. And, so the platform helps you adjust certain things, saying, how do you protect people? How do you give them access to savings in case of, say, a health emergency? This person is more important for them to get the money now than wait for 20 years, right? So there are all these different nitty-gritties of design that are super important. But by being able to have that digital infrastructure, he is able to partner with many governments simultaneously, who then take that infrastructure as an open public good and actually deploy it in very contextual, circumstances around the world based on whatever works there.
This is really great. I love the questions. What we'll do is we'll let Solomon ask his question. Then we're going to do a reflection and an exercise, and then we will come back to Nanditi's question after that. So we go till 1/2 the hour, so we have more time for this. Go ahead, Solomon.
Okay, thanks. Just to mention that I haven't seen Maria for a long time. I had the privilege with being with her when we were promoting Ashoka in Spain with Bill Wrighton. Well, and I happened to be part of the first globalizer too. Well, the second, the first one was canceled because of the we have something in Europe. I can't remember exactly what it was.
It was a volcano, right?
A volcano,
in Europe.
yes, a volcano.
Like-
Yes, exactly.
A volcano.
I like to say that more than a questioning, because I have replicated my model in many countries using alliance with other Ashoka fellows. But I like to mention just that one has to be really prepared to cooperate and prepared to expand their work. It's not that easy. I mean, an organization has to be ready. I made a lot of mistakes because I felt the pressure to expand my model. I had the pressure to say, well, you have to replicate and replicate, but if you don't do it within a strategy that is well designed, and it takes a long time to design that strategy, you're going to have a lot of problems. So even now, after so many times, I have replicated and I have used alliance with other fellows. I feel that because, for example, you need to have something, not just to propose to another network or another fellow or another community, but how is it going to be sustainable in the long run? You must have a strategy to sustain the program or whatever you're doing. And that's a real difficult thing to do. So I just to mention that the pressure to replicate, pressure to collaborate, if you're not ready, might do a lot of harm.
Good. Really good insight. Irina, do you want to go to the reflection slide? I also put it in the chat for everyone.
Yeah. Sure. Eileen, could you open the slide, please? Yeah. So we thought it would be nice for you just to sit back for a couple of minutes and just note down your thoughts on this 2 questions, and for yourself to think about. So do you enhance the capabilities of stakeholders so that they innovate and respond with contextual solutions quickly? And how do you enable these actors to solve problems locally and contextually? So whatever the problem that your organization is working on, who are those stakeholders who are probably already working on this problem as well? And how are you empowering them or supporting them or being useful to them? And how could you do more of that? And maybe just a few minutes for you to think and note down a couple of thoughts. Maybe we'll stop there, and I'll just say that Ellen, if you could skip one slide, I will just show. Yeah, so basically, we have captured a lot of the learnings that we are sharing with you in this report that is there on top in the presentation, and we have also made an exercise of a similar reflection. It's a lot more in detail than the couple of questions I asked you about, which we use in our accelerator, and we had good feedback from social entrepreneurs applying it, and it really invites you and your team to actually come together and reflect on this and think about it and prioritize, saying maybe we want to really focus on activating agency, and that's really what matters to us, or maybe we want to empower with data, and what would that look like and what would that mean. So it's definitely thought-provoking and a useful exercise. So they all are free and open to download from our website, from these links. Yeah, and I did have another example which I was going to share, but I think we can just continue with Q&A as well. That might be better. So if there are any questions right now, then we can just continue conversation. Or
otherwise, what I think I wanted to also share with you is how we have really learned to think differently and share that with our fellows. This idea of scaling impact is different to scaling an organization. I think that has, it seems very simple, but it's not. If you really want to scale your impact, we would highly recommend to focus on system change, indirect impact, and definitely not scaling your organization, because in our sector, scaling doesn't mean economies of scale. It means economies of problems, right? The bigger you are, the bigger staff you have, the more beneficiaries you want to. So please keep that in mind. The other thing that I also wanted to share, and these are some like aha moments that we've had along the way, which I think is useful for you to reflect upon. There's always this metaphor that Sanjay from Societal Thinking uses, and he says, if you want to create an elephant, you just don't put together 1,000 mice. So meaning that if you want to actually design what works at a scale, you don't do a scale what works. If you want to reach 1 billion people, you will not do it by scaling 100 times your 1 million impact, So it's really thinking completely at a complete different scale. You design the elephant, you just don't put together these 1,000 mice. The other thing that it was also interesting for us, because again, it was different to how we used to think, is that if you really want to design at exponential scale, you really need to figure out one thing that you do very well and do that one thing for many, many people, which is not the same as doing many things for a fewer people, which is what typically the social entrepreneurs happen, right? They go into a community and they are focusing on health, but then they realize the education really sucks. And then they realize climate, oh my God, they are just not. So they start expanding their programs and doing all these other things with that person in mind, which is impossible to do that if you want to do it at exponential scale. Really, to work at exponential scale, you need to do few things for many people. Okay, so just think about this. And again, maybe exponential scale is not for everybody. I remember one fellow saying, that's not for me. I actually want to be much more holistic, which is fine. Another key learning, and we've been saying this a lot, but scale is not about growing your solution, but it's much more distributing the ability to solve so others can contribute to your solution and to your vision, right? So this idea that for exponential scale is critical, that you don't, that you are not about scaling your solution and that's how I'm going to reach there. No, it's really distributing that ability to solve so everyone can be part of that vision. And I think one final thing we also have learned the hard way is that for a lot of our fellows, when they said, oh, I want to use tech, what they really wanted was to put what they were doing offline, do it online. But that's not what tech can really bring to you. What we are about in Aspire is helping our fellows first identify what is that how do they design at scale, and how technology can help with that design. So it's not bringing what works offline to online, or it's not even bringing just some more efficiency into your work, right? CRM and apps and stuff like that. But it's really thinking, okay, it's actually oftentimes is rethinking their theory of change and their strategy, right? And we've seen how many times the fellows get stuck in this tech aspect, when reality is this idea of shifting, is shifting your mindset, right? That's what really matters, is how do I become an enabler? How do I become from this idea of, how do I empower the data to the ecosystem? How do I activate agency in my communities, right? And how do I shift and transition from being the problem solver to being the ecosystem enabler? And I think that's a very, very important, and how you do that is, as Ira has explained, is thinking about these principles. Okay, how am I doing? What am I doing with data? Am I using data just to know if what I'm doing is right? Or am I using data to actually, I always like this example. Hara is one of our fellows in Indonesia. And he started to collect data. Actually, the farmers started to collect data about their farming, about the soil, about all these different things, which by the way, they own. They are the owners of the data. But by making that data available, they were all able to orchestrate an ecosystem of insurers and bankers who were starting to act, to work with these farmers. Before, it was impossible because these people didn't have any information about farmers. No, yeah. So is there something you can do with your data that activates the ecosystem? Is it opening your data going to help others be part of your vision? No.
Great.
So a lot of
good insights.
Yes.
So many wonderful learnings. Naditi, can you unmute and ask your questions?
Sure. Thank you, Debbie. And thanks to Catalyst 2030. It's been a huge learning and networking opportunity to be part of such sessions. And I think Maria really liked your input on, focus on one thing rather than doing everything, because then you can scale. So there's great insight there. My question is, so I currently mentor and act as a pro bono consultant for a rural NGO which works on gender-based violence and girl-child safety using karate in MP. Now they have, last few years, they have trained 1 lakh children and youth and saved many to get into child marriages, provided livelihoods, and giving agency to girls to fight violence and stand for their rights, feeling safe. And there are local NGOs who have got bigger power and bigger access to funders, but they will not cooperate with them and share the funders, and at some point not collaborate at all. And I'm sitting here in London trying to see how best I can help them raise more funds, scale. And I was wondering how the Ashoka or Aspire kind of, all the exciting stuff you're talking about, the design principles, how can that small grassroots NGO who doesn't speak English can access? How can I help bridge the gap? And this question can apply for many more such change makers who are working at grassroots levels, but we could be that bridge to support them with this network. So any insights into that?
So Nidia, I responded to that question on the chat. I think, we've made a commitment to ourselves that any learnings that we have and that we make, we will actually make available, as we've done, right? Ira showed to you the report, the article, some of the tools. So I don't know, Globalizer has great system change online courses that are also for free. I would probably start with that. With a small organization, I would probably start helping them really understand what is the system change they want to create. That's probably a good starting point, I think. So maybe that helps.
So is there, no, Maria, I'll go through all of them, and I've already started, and I've spent a number of years in the corporate sector and then moved to this. So, I'm learning from all the ecosystem and a number of Catalyst 2030 as mentors. So, and Ashoka Fellows, I guess my question, maybe I'll ask a bit more directly. Is there a program like Ashoka Fellows used to go through a very supportive program which helped them scale their impact? Is there a program like an incubator program or a fellowship where such grassroots organizations can get real-time support?
I mean, unfortunately, we are not the program, but there are many programs. Ashoka mostly works with Ashoka Fellows, and it's also the kind of input that we provide is more useful to organization at a certain level of thinking about national scale and so on, right? So many Ashoka Fellows in turn work with the smaller, organizations, local NGOs and so on. So maybe identifying an Ashoka Fellow who works on something like this, who runs a big organization, and seeing how they could support, or what kind of inputs they can give this organization. It depends. Also, different organizations have really different nature, right? If it's a community-based organization, they may not be targeting system change and national policy change. They actually want to be serving a community where they are, which is also great, right? There's no judgment about what's better or worse, right? And also about who the people are who are running it, why they're doing it, what are their motivations, right? So all of that needs to be taken into account when any kind of support is offered, or where do they want to go with it is most important.
Cool. I've got national ambitions, but yeah, no, thank you so much. I will start with reading the documents you shared in the chat, and we'll connect. Thank you.
Great. Next question, and I'm afraid to say your name, I might mess it up. Mr. Nair.
Abhishek.
Hi, hello. Yeah, my name is Abhishek. I work with Project Tech for Dev. We help social impact organizations leverage technology to enable their programs. So we have a few platforms. So interested to hear about kind of how Ashoka is working with it. Learned a bit about it from Irina and Maria in India earlier. And what I'm wondering is, you've shared a few examples of folks who are working to leverage their expertise for collaboration and using a platform approach. And I just want to know that through all of these examples, and I'm sure you'll have many more that you'll have shared on the call, what are the trends y'all are seeing in terms of common platform approaches? So one is like, what's common? Second is what works best across what you've seen. What works best might be contextual, but at least what's common. Yeah.
I know, Abhishek, where you're coming from, yeah. And I don't have an answer for you. But yeah, so I mean, I think it's a great question, because even one of the insights that we are having, and it's the I think it's the premise on which Tech for Dev is built, and whoever doesn't know about Tech for Dev and Glyphic and Avani, do check it out. They offer incredible open source tools for nonprofit organizations, and so they actually come into the sector with this assumption, which I think is very accurate, is that you actually need infrastructures that are common for nonprofit organizations, because most of our needs are common and overlapping, and what you need is a few really excellent infrastructures which many organizations can leverage and develop. And they're doing some phenomenal work in India around the two platforms that they have developed, called Glyphic and Avani. I think that we probably will be in a better position to answer this question about what are the common things or trends maybe a year from now, because we just started our new cohort. I think in our new cohort, it's a bit of a bias of selection as well, but we see that there's a great kind of urge in organizations to say, how do we really bring value to the networks that we have? So, we have organizations like Gunj participating, okay, who already have very large networks of, say, 1,000 organizations that actively work on in the case of Gujo, say distributing secondary recycled material. But they're saying all these amazing actors are on the ground already. We have a network that trusts each other. So you have all the important assets, right? Then the question is, how do you actually put that network on steroids, right? Like, how do you enable more value exchange within that network, right? How do you facilitate that, and what could that look like? So that definitely is one of the things that we are seeing, right? Another one, and that was an example I actually wanted to share, so I'll bring it in here. It's a platform that's been developed by an ASPIRE fellow called Samaja, the organization called Reap Benefit, and they work with, they basically work with young people who become these change makers, right? So they identify an issue in a local community, and then they report it, and they, you know, they activate other people around it, and they solve the issue and so on. So that's what they've been doing, and they developed open source platform that basically helps these young people self-identify on the platform. There's a geolocation that helps them to show that something has been done, you know, and then there is actually a front end, you know, which is kind of like a change maker portfolio of this young person who's done all these different actions, and it captures their skills and so on, right? So these are and I think what we are seeing with this platform developed with Reap Benefit is that is quite a common use case for many organizations. May not be about change makers, but it could be about something else. It could be about, you know, farming, or it could be about urban development or whatever, right? This need to create a geolocation and then activate a person around it, and sort of activate a group of people around it. So I know it's not a complete answer, Abhishek, but I know you also know it's a complex question. So I'll stop there, and maybe we can keep exploring it together.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much, Irina. Looking forward to learn what you all are learning. Yeah.
Are you on mute, Debbie? Debbie, you're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry about that. We've been so excited about the platform and learning more about it. This session's been fantastic. There is going to be another session that we do later, and I'll share that with you in a moment. We just launched the poll, so we'd love to get your feedback on the session. 2 quick questions for you to answer. It allows us to kind of prove our impact to the team and also address any other things. There's 2 big things coming up. One is we're in the middle of a learning series on fundraising. The next one is Tuesday the 25th, the building blocks of fundraising, going back to the basics. So it is more basics. And then the second one that's going to be held in May after Catalyzing Change Week is we're all fundraisers, everyone a fundraiser, from interns to the board. We have this kind of second part to this session. We wanted to bring together all the different networks and have them discuss how these networks are bringing people together. So that session, I do not have the date on this slide. That's a mistake. But that session, we'll share that in the email follow-up with you. Irina's going to join us again. Topher from Opportunity Collaboration, Transformations, FIDO Network. If you know Brendan Johnson, he's going to moderate that session. But thank you, Irina and Maria, for joining us. Don't forget to sign up for Catalyzing Change Week. So here's the links that we'll include in the chat, because we would love to have you all participate in Catalyzing Change Week and learn from our amazing speakers. Thanks again for everyone attending. We do have 1 minute, so 30 seconds each. Irina and Maria, what's your parting thought for everyone?
Don't build a platform, but be a platform.
Great. Irina.
Don't scale what works, but design for what works at scale.
Excellent.
That's
wonderful.
That's actually quite good for improvising.
Wonderful. Everyone unmute, say goodbye. Thank you to our speakers.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your participation. It was really wonderful.
Yes,
Thanks.
absolutely.
Great meeting everyone.